everybody. And welcome to Sounds About Right. We're waiting for a few more people who are running on their way here, but I'd preamble while we wait. It sounds like it's been one of those evenings today. We've had like 4 or 5 people cancel because they're not well. The traffic's been awful everywhere, and so it's a bit of a slow start. But thank you for being here. It's nice to see you. I'm Beverly Ward. I'm the founder of the Writers' Workshop. So the Writers' Workshop is upstairs in Orchard Square. We have all kinds of writing workshops, the clue's in the name, that go on all week and all month. And there are about 15 of us who are all professional writers who basically support writers in Sheffield and online. So that's us. Sounds About Right is our monthly event. And what we always do is we have a guest or two, and we also have an open mic. Just to say, David over here is videoing, so do let him know if you don't want any of your pictures anywhere. He just makes a little clip that we just put on social media. So that's that. I'm also tonight reading from my memoir, because sometimes, like I say, we have 1 or 2 guests, and then I thought, hey, I was racking my brains going, who in the Writers' Workshop has written a memoir? And then I was like, oh yeah, me. Maybe I'll do it. So I'm going to open with a little bit of my memoir because I don't normally read it, partly because it's really depressing. But I'm going to read a little bit of it, and then I'm going to have a chat with Adam about the process of writing memoir and his kind of writing journey. And then Adam's going to read a bit from his book, which is called Cold Fish Soup. So I'm still preambling, hoping they might arrive. So that's the format. The format is the first half, Adam and I will read. We'll have a little break, and then we'll have an open mic. The open mic was full. There are quite a few open mic people who are sick, so if anyone's sitting here itching to read and we end up with a bit of time, do shout out and let us know. The reason we call the event Sounds About Right, we had a little poll at the time, and because we like the idea of encouraging people to get up and read something and not to worry about whether they're great performers or whether it's polished. If it sounds about right, that'll do. And we do welcome all kinds of writing. So I think we're unusual in that we have people reading bits of memoir and stories and poems and life writing, all kinds of different things. Is there anything else I need to say, or shall I just start? Just start, says Mary. Shall I sit or shall I stand? I don't know. I'll stand. And I'll hope I can read without my glasses on. So I was wondering which bit to read of my depressing book, and I thought I'd read the introduction, because it's the beginning, and also it talks about the process of writing, and as I'm talking to an audience of writers, I thought that might be interesting. But I'm going to skip bits, so forgive me if I go, what am I doing? For anybody who doesn't know, the book is called Dear Blacksmith, and it's about the death of my partner, probably 8 years ago now, who died 8 months into a relationship, and also a few weeks after my mum and last remaining parent died, so I was having quite a hard time when I wrote it. It is 2 years, 8 months and 4 days since my love blacksmith Paul died. A strange day to note, you may think, but it's been logged on my calendar for 2 years, 4 months and 8 days. On that day, I was sitting sobbing again in the pale blue room of the hospice, the one just down the corridor from where my mother had also recently died, the one marked counselling, do not disturb. I was asking when it would end, when I could hope to feel some semblance of normality return. My bereavement counsellor paused, recognising perhaps that I might not like her answer, and told me that, statistically speaking, 2 years, 8 months and 4 days is the average time it takes to recover from a major bereavement. I broke off from crying to snort with laughter. It was clearly ridiculous. The date seemed to be impossibly far away. It seemed impossible that I could survive for that long. It was also impossible to think that it could ever be over. I put it in my phone, maybe as a date to work towards, maybe as a black joke or ironic statement. 13th of November, 2018. Grief ends. As a writer, I'm fascinated by endings and beginnings, by story and narrative. When Paul died, just 8 months into a beautiful love affair, I couldn't make sense of it at all. The end just happened in the middle, I wrote. It was how I felt. Unexpectedly and completely without warning, his story was over, and the story I'd been writing in my head, you know the one, unconventional hero rescues unlikely heroine, happy ever after ensues, was over too. The narrative was fractured, and the writer, me, was broken. It wasn't a story I wanted to live. It wasn't a story I wanted to write. But it was the life I was left with, and somehow it seemed that writing was the only thing I still wanted to do. I didn't set out to write a memoir. I didn't even set out to write a blog. I just put words on the page, one after the other, the way other people put one foot in front of the other, and I wrote. I wrote to capture my memories, and I wrote as a student of my own grief. Mostly, I wrote in order to survive. It is hard when constructing a memoir to know where to begin and where to stop. I search for the place to start and think of Paul. If this is Paul's story, then it begins back in 1963 with a baby at a mother's breast. It begins at Hunter's Bar, Sheffield, in the rented terrace house on Penryn Road, the one over the hedge from my old back garden, the one we could see from my bedroom window as we lay in each other's arms years later. But it begins even earlier than that, with an antique-dealing father and the mother who hoarded treasures like she already knew love would be scarce. It begins with a youthful romance that gave birth to a baby boy. But I am not qualified to write that narrative without Paul here to guide me, not when the mother who nurtured him followed him swiftly out of reach. No, this cannot be Paul's story. So perhaps this is our story, his and mine, the story of our love. But when does that story begin? Does it begin back in 1992 when he slept and worked in the blacksmith's forge on Garden Street, across the yard from the office of Swamp Circus where I served an apprenticeship in the arts? Does it begin as the sound of hammer on iron rings out across the cobbled yard to the unheated garret where I shiver, attempting to make peace with the taste of soy milk in tea? Or does it start circa 1997 when, as a young divorcee, I was introduced to Paul in the Lescar by a mutual friend, Ed? Does it begin with his thwarted attempts to play Cupid? Or does it start almost 20 years later in 2014 when, at 45 and 53 years of age, Ed reunited us again and we finally fell in love? Perhaps. But though this story is our love story, it is also the story of the year following Paul's death. And though Paul's presence echoes through those days like the ring of hammer on iron, for most of the story he is absent. So what's left is my story of love, loss, and grief. And where does that begin? Does it begin with love or with loss? And how can I separate the two? I'm going to skip a little bit and tell you that I started writing in Tenuith, where I was a tutor on a writing retreat, and I went there a few weeks after he died. That year I didn't do much writing. I only wrote one poem, but I also wrote the eulogy for Paul's funeral and an email to a young widow who had only recently asked me for advice about publishing a book. She told me to join this writing program, Skip. I followed Megan's prompts for 30 days, often writing late at night in snatched moments when the children were asleep, onto a blog that I initially just called Grief Writing. I shared the results with other members of the online writing group, and then one day I decided to share something with friends on Facebook. They wanted to hear more, and so gradually I started sharing more of my writing, and soon I was creating my own posts. As I watched the numbers of hits on my blog rising from tens to hundreds and then to thousands, I realized that my writing was resonating far beyond my immediate circle, and I changed its title to Swimming Through Clouds. The motif of clouds kept recurring, and swimming was one of the activities that kept me sane. When I swim, the world and my cares recede, and when I swim outdoors, suspended between water and sky, I feel part of something bigger. My mind is still at the water's surface, and I feel at peace. Even in the early days of grief, when I was swimming, I could stop crying. When I was swimming, I felt okay. Swimming through clouds seemed to capture something both literal and metaphorical about the way I journeyed through grief. I'm skipping a bit. I said it was difficult to know where the story began, but it is even harder to know where to end it. As a writer, it's always a challenge to know when something is finished. There are always sentences that can be rearranged, paragraphs that can be cut, loose ends that can be tied up or left hanging. There are a multitude of ways in which a story can be told. A writer can change the viewpoint, alter the tense, start at the end, flash back to the beginning. Words, sentences, and paragraphs rearrange the meaning. The reader's experience dependent to some extent on the narrative that the author chooses to present. But this story is true, and there's only so much I can do to it without losing its authenticity. When I sat this April in my room at the Centre by the Sea, thinking about how to construct my writing as a memoir, I wondered at first whether I should begin the story from scratch and write with the benefit of hindsight. I could have chosen to write it from my vantage point 2 years on, looking down like a seagull on the turbulent waves of grief. but I chose not to. I chose not to because there's something visceral about the way I recorded my grief moment by moment, and I didn't want to smooth over those edges or wash away the pain. Though I know it makes for difficult reading, I also know that it is in seeing that anguish reflected that the grieving can feel companioned. And it is in reading about my resurrection that the grieving can find hope. Rest assured, reader, the resurrection did happen. In fact, it's mainly because of that resurrection that I chose not to start the story again, because this is fact and not fiction, my life, not just my story. And though the writer in me may, given time, be able to find a better way to write the narrative, the human cannot live with this material any longer. The human is tired of looking backwards and of picking over carcasses. The human's eyes are on fresh horizons. So where does the story end? Does a love story finish just because the hero dies? Or do the threads that bind two lives together continue beyond the grave, beyond the last page? Does grief really end 2 years, 8 months, and 4 days after a traumatic loss? Or does sadness echo through the days that follow, seeping like wet ink onto the blank pages of the future? Of course it does. In fact, though it gets easier to live with, grief shifts and changes like clouds in the sky and goes on in some form forever. This book focuses solely on the first year of loss, because I want to keep the focus on my precious relationship with Paul, and not because I want to give the illusion that grief is resolved after a year. Grief, like love, goes on for eternity. I realise now that I wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you. So yeah, I'm multitasking, which is something I'm very used to. I'm a lone parent running the writer's workshop and my writing workshops and writing books and doing too many things all the time. So I'm now going to go into guest mode, and I'm going to welcome Adam Farah to sort of stage. We can sit, let's sit. So Adam has also had a bit of a nightmare journey from Manchester tonight, I believe.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent.
So yeah, it's taken you hours, I gather.
Yeah, about 3. It's been fun.
So we're very grateful to you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And yeah, so I've just finished Goldfish Soup, literally this morning, and I did really enjoy it. And I was surprised, like reading the blurb. Like it wasn't quite what I expected. And the first thing that really surprised me was there was loads of cold water swimming in it, which I kind of resonated with me because I like swimming. And I didn't see that. I don't see that being marketed, and it's like such a current thing.
Some people hate cold water swimming. Like they've got the idea of wild swimming throws people into a rage. They just go, it's just swimming. We called it swimming when I was younger. I think my publisher has been a bit sort of hesitant in marketing
to jump on that bandwagon.
It's got one essay in it that's about obsession with the North Sea and throwing myself into water. So, yeah, if you love wild swimming and don't have anything against it, then please buy the book.
Yeah, I suppose what I was just sort of thinking about my own. That's the reason I read that was because it's about the process of writing a memoir. And at the Writers' Workshop, we have quite a lot of people writing memoir, and they hit upon various stumbling blocks, and I thought it might be interesting to talk about those. But one of the things I noticed when I was reading your book, or maybe in other things I'd read about it, was that I believe it started out as a different book. And this is a conversation I was having with a client recently. He was like, everybody wants this book, but I can't do it, and the experience wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and so I can't write the book. And I was saying, well, maybe you could write about the experience of how the experience wasn't the experience you thought it was going to be, and the book then might turn into a book that you weren't expecting to write. Yeah. Can you tell us about how this book originated, and am I right that it didn't begin, that it started in a different form?
I was going to say it evolved, but it mutated, I think is the right word. Yeah. Originally, I envisioned a series of stories about the East Yorkshire coast that I moved to when I was 16, and it completely transformed my life, and I became obsessed with that coastline and the experiences that my family had on that coastline. So I thought, I'll just write a book in honor of that coastline, which is crumbling into the sea. It's like disappearing at a rate of about 10 feet a year. So I thought, I need to write about these places before they all disappear. And then about 6 months into the writing, I had a bit of a breakdown, and so the book actually starts with me on the edge of a cliff, trying to decide, what I should do. And clearly I decided a certain thing, and I'm here, so it's fine. I wrote the book. But at that point, it became a book about trying to write a book about a place when you want to throw yourself off a cliff. But despite that, I think it's humorous. I tried to make a lot of those darker elements as palatable as possible, because it was important for me to write an entertaining book and it not to be miserable, because it's full of dark things, but I want people to start it and continue reading it, because if it's too dark and too miserable, then people give up.
Yeah, I mean, it was surprisingly not that dark to read, and I did think that as I was reading it, that there are a lot of dark themes in the book, but it doesn't feel overwhelmingly dark at all. So,
yeah, that was my hope, to try and sort of not undermine those serious subjects by just making a joke every time I got near a dark thing, but have a balance between the light and the dark, and seems that it's the thing that I've done. Yeah. That's what I'm hearing back.
Can I ask you, as a writer, because that was obviously a difficult period of your life, were there times when you felt like chucking the book into the sea and just thinking, what am I even doing? Why am I bothering? Or did you always feel like, no, there's something here, and was that a thing that kept you moving forward?
It kind of helped me carry on, but I was really determined to write this book about this marginalised part of the UK that no one cared about. It's like, I care about it. I'm going to write a whole book. It wasn't until I had the manuscript and was trying to sell it, that's when I thought, oh God, have I wasted 3 years of my life writing this book about a part of the country that no one seems to care about except me. So I'd almost given up on it about a year after I wrote it, 6 months to a year, and then I won the Northbound Book Award, which is how it came to be published.
Am I right in thinking the Northbound Book Award is part of the Northern Writers Awards?
Yeah.
I also won a Northern Writers Award years ago, and nobody wanted to publish that book, so it was disappointing. It did not change my life, but it was a really nice thing to win.
Well, the Northbound Book Award, if you do have a manuscript about the North, ideally, it's definitely worth throwing in for that award. It happens every year. They've just announced, or they're just looking at the 5th recipient of it. But you win $5,000 and a book deal.
Amazing.
So it's not to be sniffed at.
No, amazing. So you're saying you wanted to write about this part of the country that nobody really cares about. Do you want to tell us about that part of the country and why you care about it? Or what it means to you?
Yeah, well, when the piece I'm going to read later on sort of touches on this, but when I moved to the town of Withensea on the East Yorkshire coast, I had this idea in my head that I was moving from Suffolk, this little town in Suffolk where my life wasn't going very well, to what was essentially Baywatch. I thought, I'm going to live by the seaside, and it's going to be like, and when I got there, like the beach was brown, and the sea was brown, and everything was crumbling into the sea, and it was kind of, should have been depressing, but for me it's like, it's a land of opportunity. I can become a completely different person. So for me, it became a magical place from the off. So in 1992, when I moved there, it was like, this place, I don't know, it kind of got in my bones immediately. I think of it as Withensea as my hometown, but I only spent about 5 years there. But it's the place that I go back to all the time, and really during lockdown, I missed profoundly. I couldn't travel from Manchester over to the East Yorkshire coast. I could just look at pictures that my mum had taken and try and commune with it that way. It was really, it's just such an important place for me, and so much has happened to me and my family. So my brother died in that town, which was a tragic thing that happened to my family there. But my mum started a mature burlesque troupe.
I did look this up when I was reading. too much information. I was in the bath, and I was like, now I've got to look up Britain's Got Talent and look
Oh
for
yeah,
this
yeah.
woman. I was like,
Because there's a whole essay about my mum joining this burlesque troupe when she was 65, which she still does. She's 73, and she's got no functioning knees. It's really, I worry every time she does the can. But it was like this magical story that came from this town where you have to make your own entertainment because no one's going to bring it to you. Yeah. You're in a little town that no one cares about. It's tumbling into the sea. No one cares that that's happening. And because of that, it's this weirdly sort of hopeful, energy-filled place. And I'm still writing about it now.
Fascinating. One of the other links, I have a house in Bridlington, which I bought after I inherited money when my mum died, and that's what I did with it. And I didn't really know Bridlington, and in a grief-stricken state, thought that's a really cheap house in Bridlington. I'm going to go and buy it. And I've not been, to that bit. I've always wanted to go to Spurn Point, so you've given me lots of enthusiasm for going to visit.
Yeah, that whole coastline,
places.
Running from.
I love it.
From the Holderness coast, which runs from Flamborough Head, if you know Flamborough Head at the top of East Yorkshire, down to Spurn Point. It's so varied, isn't it? It's like you've got chalk cliffs and crumbling mud cliffs and this beautiful nature reserve right at the very end in the Humber Estuary. There's so much going on there, and there's always people doing ridiculous stuff that you can write about.
So another question I had for you that's very much something that writers I work with come up against all the time is you said about your brother's death and your mum's burlesque troupe and other, your family are very much characters in the book and as our friends and everything else. And I find a lot of people, what I find when people come to the Writers' Workshop to write is they do one of two things. They come thinking they want to write a memoir and then decide to turn it into fiction, or they come determined not to write a memoir and over years I keep going, but really it's a memoir. And they eventually go, oh, I've got to put myself into it and my heart into it, and that's going to make it the better book.
Yeah.
But people grapple all the time with this, what will other people think, and if they're in my book, will they hate me? And it terrifies a lot of people. How terrifying was it to write about your family, and are they comfortable with it?
They're comfortable now,
Yeah.
but a precondition of winning this award was that I had to get their permission to publish the book. So I had to make sure that everyone in my family was okay being included in it. And luckily they were, but I'd gone through a previous period, the first bit of memoir that I had published was a piece about my brother. And it's a thing that people do when they write memoir, is they go for the darkest, most miserable thing that they have ever gone through. So I wrote about my brother's suicide. And because my family have always been very open and very easy to talk to, I just thought, they'd be fine with me writing about this. And I was a bit too blasé with their feelings. So when that was published, they got quite upset, and I had to go on a bit of an apology tour with my family and just prove my intentions were good, and I didn't mean to, cause them upset. So they were very wary when I was putting this book together, which touches on my brother's death, but also so many other things. But they all love it.
Aww.
Apart from my dad. My dad hasn't read it. He's in it, but he's got 3 books by his chair in the living room. He's got 2 Richard Osman books and this. And I've asked him if when he's going to read it, and he just pats it. He's like, one day. And it's like, well, he's 77 now, and he's got heart problems, he's got diabetes, he's got kidney disorders, he's got a lot of things wrong with him. And I kind of go, time is ticking, you need to read the book. But he's probably never going to read it. He's probably going to never read those Richard Osmans, but that's just how it is.
Yeah. I wrote my first book that I wrote, which was just a manuscript my dad read, and then did his typical thing of saying, yeah, it was all right, but what you should write is this, and then told me his story, and I was like, yeah, thank you for that. Anyway, my brother said the same. You should write about my divorce. I'm like, write about your own divorce.
Yeah, people do that. When they find out that you write memoir.
I've got my own stuff to write.
Yeah, people are like, I've got
a great story.
When you hear comedians, they're always having people going, I've got a joke for you. And it's like that. Once they find out that you write memoir, they're just coming to you with their stories. But,
Yeah, exactly. So the other thing I was thinking as I was reading it is, because it is quite a I'm trying to say this nicely, it's not a rambling, circuitous kind of, it's like a journey, you know, around the coast and around a lot of different topics. And it reads very effortlessly. But I know, again, as a writer, sometimes that where do I put this bit? Does it go here? Does it go there? You know, should I move? Like with your brother's death, it's sort of mentioned early on, but you hold back on telling the story till later on. Did it take a lot of structuring? Like, or what, did you write it like that? You know?
I didn't write it with that structure in mind initially, because, like I say, it mutated. But I had a mentor working with me. There's a really great novelist and memoir writer called Jen Ashworth. And I got some Arts Council funding to pay her to basically hold me to account every month. And I had to deliver her a new essay every month. And we'd meet this was all during lockdown, we'd meet over Skype and just go through it. And she would tell me where I was going wrong or encourage me on certain bits. And she was the guiding light, really, that made it into a memoir and not a collection of essays, because she recognised there were sort of repeated themes that were running through the essays that I could exploit. So she said, what you need is an essay that acts as basically a first chapter that will subtly signpost what's coming through the book and introduce some of the characters. And once I did that, like, the whole book fell into place. I knew exactly where to put all the other essays and what I needed to put at the end. But it took that guidance. And now, like, writing a second book now, like, I don't have her guidance anymore. Can I even do this? So I've tried to internalize everything that she taught me and apply it to my current writing.
Are you writing another memoir or something else?
Just another collection of essays of, sort of dark, light, mostly trying to be a humour collection. Yeah. But we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, it felt in the end like that backdrop of the crumbling into the sea and how do you survive, really, and what do you save and how do you keep going, felt like the prevailing theme for me. I haven't got a clock in here. Are we about time for Adam to read, do you think? 25 past 7? Okay.
We can carry on talking. I'm quite happy to.
We can carry on talking for a few more minutes.
Yeah.
A few more minutes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
The other key question I needed to ask you is, anybody who knows me knows that I do like a fancy outfit, but I never wear gold. And this came about because your publicity photos have you in a gold suit in the sea. What the heck was that about?
Well, I bought a gold suit off Wish.com for £23. For an event at the Manchester Fringe Awards, and I was asked to give the spoken word prize. And they said, the theme is glitz and glamour. And I don't have anything that's glitzy or glamorous. And I'd heard a lot about Wish at the time, and just found this suit, like 23 quid, perfect. And it turned up after about 6 weeks, revolting suit. It was made of kind of rubber, and it sort of smelt a bit strange. But once I got on stage in it, people paid attention. So I was like, I'll do some more spoken word things in that suit. And I started to get booked as the bloke with the suit. And so that was quite useful. But then I thought, as soon as I knew this book was coming out, I was like, I'm going to have my pictures taken in the sea. What do I need? That suit. I'll get in the sea. But the North Sea basically ate that suit. The salt just started to strip all the gold off it. So I didn't have anything gold to wear tonight, apart from my Golden Girls t-shirt as my gesture towards the gold theme.
So I had to go charity shop shopping, but I'm quite pleased with it. I quite like it.
It's really nice.
I quite like it. It's very sweaty, though.
Yeah.
Like synthetic. It's just not the kind of thing I would normally wear. Yeah, so I mean, that was one of the things I really loved about the thing about the sea, and I kind of related to it as a child, that kind of just being the first to see the sea, just running straight for the sea, like in this desperate sort of way. But that you were just kind of chucking yourself in the water with your clothes on.
Yeah, I should have drowned as a child, because the title essay is all about this water compulsion that I'd had since I was a kid. So I would be the first one in the sea. If we'd go on a school trip near a river, I'd somehow find a way to be in that river. And this real sort of obsession. And the first time I went sea swimming, wild swimming, was a December in East Yorkshire. And I just went out there in my trunks and got in the sea. And that's the moment where I should have drowned. I was doing everything possible to come a cropper. But somehow I survived to write the book.
And we're glad you did. What I'm going to do now, I think, is I'm going to vacate the stage and let you read. And then if anyone has a question for Adam, maybe shout out or put your hands up and we'll do it that way. But thank you for listening to my bit of memoir, and thank you, Adam.
Okay, so before I read this, does everyone know what the lead singer from Aerosmith looks like? Steven Tyler, right? Because you have to have that visual in your head for this piece. So this is part of an essay about my desire to become an entirely new person when I moved to the north. And I decided, rather than be the nerdy little kid that I was down south, I was going to become a rock star. And this is one of the key pieces of that puzzle. The year before I moved to Withensea, I fell in love with Steven Tyler, the lead singer of the band Aerosmith. In love isn't the right term, really. It's not like I wanted to go to bed with him. I had no fantasies about us one day shopping for mid-century furniture together. But I found him alluring in a way I couldn't fully articulate at the time. I'd never felt this way about another man before, so in love was how I saw it. My interest in him began after reading a magazine interview with Janet Jackson, in which she described Tyler as one of the most attractive men alive. And looking at the accompanying photo of him, I found myself agreeing. His sassy confidence while wearing leggings, that sink plunger pout, not handsome, but appealing in a way that made handsomeness seem like a trinket, something commonplace that most people could achieve pretty easily with some dental work and a decent haircut. Wanting more, I bought an Aerosmith album with a photo of two trucks having sex on the cover and found that I was in love with Tyler's music too. Pretty soon I was spending all of my money on Aerosmith records and clipping photos of the band from magazines to tack onto my bedroom wall, converting it into what qualified, depending on your perspective, as either a shrine or a stalker's lair. Lying in bed and listening to Tyler's alley cat voice singing Sweet Emotion, no direction I could look without seeing his face looking back at me, I felt closer to the world he inhabited, an appealing one where the letter G was surplus, full of strutting, rocking, and loving. These were distant, exciting things that I dearly wanted for myself, and he seemed to have an abundance. I recorded Aerosmith's appearances on MTV, building up a VHS archive that I rewatched analytically, studying Steven Tyler's form. I made note of the way he draped his body in diaphanous fabrics and long Technicolor silks, which followed the movements of his limbs like comic book lotion lines as he pranced across the stage or confidently humped his mic stand. Of how, though he moved like a first-year drama student playing a wood nymph, all strange elongated arm movements, reckless twirls and ants in pants shimmies, he somehow didn't seem ridiculous. It would eventually dawn on me that what I needed was to transform myself into someone like him. If I could adopt just a pinch of his energy and self-assurance, then the things I wanted for my new life in the North, to be seen, respected, and desired, to not be thought of as a clown, would fall into place. And if I was very, very lucky, then Janet Jackson might want to kiss me. When we made the move to Withensea, I carefully packed up and transported my shrine, which I reassembled in my new bedroom, then expanded upon, drawing a life-size mural on my wall of Aerosmith's lead guitarist, Joe Perry, copied from a photograph of him performing at a huge stadium concert in California. I drew the crowds beyond him, the thousands of small, cheering faces, a wall of adoration. And here I would mime along to Walk This Way or Love in an Elevator, twirling, strutting, and being Steven Tyler. While I was imitating him, I'd forget my own appearance and think of the two of us as physically identical. But once I was done and the dizziness had passed, I'd remember that there were horses who bore a closer resemblance to Steven Tyler than I did. Put one in a lycra jumpsuit and a headscarf and it wasn't even a close second. But I didn't see this as an obstacle. While I knew that transforming myself into his doppelganger represented a challenge, I believed that time and determination could get me anywhere, and that it all came down to the lips. I'd read about the legend of Milo of Croton, a 6th century Greek wrestler who was said to have picked up a newborn calf and continued to do so every day until he was able to lift the adult bull it became. Inspired by his dedication, I spent my first summer in Withensea performing daily mouth-stretching exercises in front of the mirror, opening my jaws as far as they would allow, out of the hope that, in time, my mouth would become as broad and flapping as Tyler's. I daydream about developing an anaphylactic reaction so drastic that it would permanently puff up my lips, leaving them as plump and kissable as his. But lacking a nut allergy or easy access to a hornet's nest, I got by on gently blowing while pouting. "Why do you keep sighing?" my mother asked, looking up from the TV as I puffed my way through the living room. "Are you depressed?" "No," I replied, caught out and embarrassed, not willing to admit to her how deeply I wanted to transform myself into someone else. "I'm fine." "Well, whatever it is you're up to, stop it. You sound like a sad little train." I ignored her and carried on, like the little engine that could. And later that summer, I bought some tight jeans and a few flowing shirts from a charity shop. I started wearing an amethyst pendant and let my hair grow out into the establishing phases of what would become a billowing mullet. If my aim had been to dress as if I was having an early onset midlife crisis, then I was nailing it. But by the time I started college that September, I had high hopes for me and my new look. While I was still shy and insecure, I was also convinced that people would notice me in a way they hadn't in Suffolk. That after all the work I'd put in, they'd find me impressive and alluring, allowing me to ride the wave of their assumption until the fantasy became inseparable from the reality. My mind moved to that scene in Grease 2, where the dorky Maxwell Caulfield appears on his motorbike at a roadside bowling alley, his true identity concealed by black leather and sunglasses. Mouths drop open in awe, and the cast is driven to launch into a song called "Who's That Guy?", each of them curious about this new and mysterious arrival. On my first day at college, though, my new look went without comment. It was the same the next day, and the one after that. And after a few weeks spent wafting through the campus, it was clear to me that the chances of anyone thinking to ask who that guy was had moved from slim to improbable. So I went to my mother for advice. "I'm not sure this is working," I said, confessing everything about my efforts to reinvent myself. "I think I look like a nerd." "You are not a nerd," she said, offended. "None of my children are nerds." She looked me up and down. "You look cool." She was trying hard to keep the doubt from her voice. This was surely a matter of maternal pride. After all, no one wants to admit that they went to the effort of gestating a baby for 9 months, only to discover that its life's ambition is to resemble the man who wrote "Dude Looks Like a Lady." But the evidence in front of her defied even the blindness of a mother's love. "Okay," she said. "Maybe you could at least stop wearing that blouse." "It's not a blouse," I said, annoyed. "It's a shirt." "What size is it?" I pulled at the collar and craned my neck to look at the label. "I can't see a size," I said. "It just says petite." Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Has anyone got a question for Adam? We've got a few minutes before we have a break. If anyone has anything they want to ask publicly, but also we'll have a break and then you can talk to Adam separately anyway. We have some books for sale. Phil?
It's a challenge because, no one remembers word for word a conversation they had 30 years ago. So there's a bit of filling in the blanks. But I think as long as you're being authentic to the person that is in that conversation with you, and you're true to the kind of conversation that was happening, it's okay to play with the sort of creative side of that. But the authenticity of the book was so important to me. Like, every story that I wanted to tell, I would go to my mum and go, because my mum has got an excellent memory, and I go, like, do you remember that time? And she'd go, yeah, that petite, that shirt. Like, she has recorded all of my failures and all of my embarrassments, so they're all there for me to go and take from. Yeah, they are, yeah, and siblings especially. You know, my remaining siblings know everything that I did. They've got receipts. And now, finally, they're helpful, they're lucrative, but instead of being used as something to beat me with.
Thanks. Is there any other question, Bryony?
Because they started as essays, so they were all, every story in here, it's like an individual, should be a standalone tale. So there's a story about my mum's burlesque, there's a story about my brother's death, there's a story about paranormal belief on the Yorkshire coast and people who believe that interdimensional werewolves are coming into the world through portals. It's all very strange. So they all had, I intended them to be read as standalone stories. And then as I was writing it, and the whole process of writing it corrupted, it developed a narrative arc. So they're kind of chapters. When I did the audiobook, I was told to refer to them as chapters, because essays was deemed confusing for the way Audible works. But yeah, I write essays because they're easier, because you have like 8,000 words rather than 80,000 words, so you can sort of condense an idea into one thing. Essays are great. I fully recommend them.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. It sounds more manageable, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's another thing we come across all the time is these terms of like people saying, you know, I'm writing essay, I'm writing memoir, I'm writing autofiction, I'm writing creative non-fiction, and like
they're interchangeable. Yeah.
I think so. It's confusing. Last question I'm just going to ask because I realised I didn't is why is it called coldfish soup? And then we're going to have a break. There was no coldfish soup in there. I think, was there? Did I skip it? I was in a rush.
The title essay is called Coldfish Soup. So coldfish soup is what my daughter thought the North Sea was like. So
yeah.
it's the idea of my obsession with the North Sea, which she had no interest in, despite my encouragement. She's like, it's like you're swimming in coldfish soup. And she thought it was disgusting. But it was actually, originally, it was going to be called God Hates Withensea, which is the second essay in the book, which is about the coastal erosion and the various problems that has caused. But I was told no one in America will buy your book if it says God hates on the front of it.
Yeah.
And it came out, in fact, yesterday it came out in America a year ago, and people are still buying it there. Yeah. So I think it was the right decision.
It's a good title, and I'm sorry I missed that bit.
No.
Like I said, I read it.
No, I appreciate you reading the whole thing. Most
did.
people I've definitely read it, and they've just read a little bit.
No,
so.
well, usually when I interview people, I haven't read their books, but I was interested in yours, so that's a compliment.
Thank you.
I'm interested in all of our guests. Honestly, I am.
You'll have to read, going forward, you'll have to read every single book throughout.
But you can usually talk about how somebody's written it without reading it, but because it's memoir, I felt like I wanted to know what was behind it. Yeah, I said this, I was interviewed Gavin Extons, who's a novelist, the other day, and I said, I'm really sorry I haven't read any of your books. And he said, I find that really reassuring, because I don't read anything either. And obviously, as writers, we're supposed to be reading all the time, but...
Yeah, and then you start getting sent books, and you're so flattered at first when that starts happening, and then suddenly you have 20 books that you've got to read and provide an opinion on. Yeah. And it's, there are worse labours to have.
Yeah, I do think it's important as a writer to read, if you can. But I also, as I said, I'm a lone parent with a lot of other things to do, and I don't like that pressure of I must be reading all the time. Yeah.
'Cause I was told, reading and writing is like breathing in and breathing out, and it's an important thing to try and focus on. Yeah. And I'm completely self-taught, really. I didn't do a creative writing degree. In fact, I learnt through doing spoken word and open mics and trying out little stories in front of audiences. So I just felt my way forward.
There's a lot of roots in, aren't there? Yeah, I did all the English degree, so I think I did all the reading when I had time.
Yeah, you put the work in. I didn't.
Right, we're going to stop because I'm just going to start chatting and dig myself into more holes. Let's have a little break, and then we're going to have the open mic. So We don't have a bar downstairs because it's just too noisy, so the bar is upstairs. Thank you, Adam. Do you have a chat with Adam and buy his books?
Thank you very much.
We're going to move on to Andre, if that's okay. Give him a round of applause.
It was a really interesting conversation you guys had about memoir versus fiction. In a conversation I related to because I'm going to be reading a piece of fiction that my wife likes to remind me is just my life. And I think the reason that I call it fiction is because I love lying. And that's generally not something you can do very much as a socially responsible person. And so fiction is kind of a place where I can get that out of my system. So I don't think you need to know too much in order for this excerpt to make sense. The novel that I'm working on takes place in a character's mind during the pandemic as he sort of slowly loses his marbles. And so he's, at this point, remembering an earlier period in his life. I went to the city on the plane because, like a fool, I was trying to start a new life. As we have already established, there are many ways of being a fool. Some fools never leave the place they were born. But I was the kind of fool who believed it was possible to be born again, and so I arrived in the city on the plane as the summer was ending and took my place with the other fools on the second floor of a breeze-block building by the edge of a forest. For the next 4 years, we would all be fools together, singing songs, reading poetry, drinking alcohol, praying to an ever-receding God. It was a regular fool's paradise. One person, and perhaps only one person among us, was not a fool. His name was Thomas. Thomas was a genius. He had such an unusual amount of raw, crackling intelligence that he rarely achieved higher than a B, had few friends, and almost never left his apartment in the basement 3 floors below me. This was because he had already learned the secrets of language. He understood that human speech was simply hoots and grunts, and writing a series of symbols meant to represent hoots and grunts, and that power went to those able to play the hooting and grunting game better than anyone else. He had learned to play this particular game to a high standard early on, and he could play it in several languages. During his formative years as the child of missionaries, he'd concluded that most of the unhappiness experienced by our species came down to a category mistake, by which we invested an exhalation of breath and a movement of the tongue, teeth, and lips with cosmic significance. God, earth, humanity. Say the words. Form them with your mouth. Say them over and over again. Feel how ridiculous they become. A man living alone in a cell reads a series of lines and curves on the page, and he becomes angry. Until you understand what a sick joke this is, you'll never be free. I met Thomas during the first week of term. Such was the extent of my foolishness that our conversation quickly turned into an argument about whether or not it was appropriate to refer to the Judeo-Christian Islamic God using masculine pronouns. I said that English was a gendered language, and so it was inevitable that God would have to be either masculine or feminine. Thomas asked me what gender the table we were sitting at was. This settled the matter, and so began my long humiliation. In time, I would learn that the question of God and gender was more complicated in other languages, and that I had stumbled into a theological debate that had been raging for centuries. But by that point, I would already have accepted that I was a fool walking confidently by the edge of a cliff, a man who thought that because his last step had landed on solid ground, his next step would too. I am tempted to say that my encounter with Thomas's ghost brought all these memories back to the surface. But the truth is that my thoughts had been tending in that direction for months. There is only so much one can consider living in a couple of cramped rooms underground, and the past has a way of asserting itself when the mind is idle. That's an interesting word, idle. For a long time, I thought it must share a root with idle, with an O, something to do with hollowness or sterility. But it's not the case. The former has a Greek root, eidos, meaning an image or form. The latter is Proto-West Germanic of uncertain earlier origin, ital, to be vain or without use, which is just further evidence of the hoots and grunts theory of language. My mind was idle, it was vain and without use. It sought an image or form. It returned to those years in the city on the plain, the years when I became friends with Thomas, the years when I discovered that being an idiot is far better than being a fool.
Thank you, Andre. Do we have Tamara here somewhere? I'm not sure I know. Hi, Tamara. Nice to meet you. Come up.
Good evening. I'm going to share 2 or 3 short poems, and the first one is called Playtime, and it's set in, or it's based on one of my earliest memories when I was 3 years old. We moved to St. Lucia for my dad's job and lived there for 3 years. So most of my earliest memories are from then, not from Manchester where I was born. And we had a big tree that was my little playhouse. So this is about that memory. And as I said, it's called Playtime. Curled up in a mango tree, its shape a perfect dome. Only 6, I'm running free in my living pretend home. Its shape a perfect dome as I perch among the branches of my living pretend home where imagination dances. As I perch among the branches, the games are never ending, where imagination dances like my limbs ever ascending. The games are never ending in this world of make-believe, like my limbs ever ascending and I never want to leave. In this world of make-believe, only 6, I'm running free, and I never want to leave, curled up in a mango tree. Thank you. And this next poem, also a personal memory, is from when I was about 18. Before university, I went to northern Spain to try and get my Spanish up before studying Spanish. And I lived in a flat in Spain with some friends from back in the UK. And so this is based on an experience I and my friend had in Santander. And obviously I've had to work with the dialogue a bit, but the punchline is what was actually said by my friend. So it's called En la Cuesta, which means on the hill. Striding up the Cuesta in Santander, shopping bags heavy, but we don't care. It's a gorgeous day, and the weather's fair, and we love this city. Nearly halfway up, and then he appears. We look at him, both wary. He confirms our fears. Hello, lovely ladies. How are you, my dears? You both looking pretty. My friend jumps into action while I watch, amazed. We're busy. He won't take it, but she isn't fazed. Keeps cool, looking forward, not an eyebrow raised. But he's not leaving, is he? Well, then give me your number if you're busy now. Ain't no problem. We'll chat later. I'm here anyhow. Miss this chance to meet up. That we can't allow. It would be a pity. If he won't take a hint, then she'll make it clear. Gaze still fixed forward. Right, my friend, look here. We don't want to chat now. Our numbers won't be shared. And we're always busy. Thank you. And this last piece is a bit more of a social commentary. When I was in secondary school, we read A Visit from the Footbinder, and some of those issues of things that are done to mainly women in the name of beauty, and some other articles I read on other topics, sometimes in the name of morality, were really playing through my head. So this piece reflects on that, and it does come home a little bit more into some of our Western things that we get up to as well in the name of beauty. And it's called Skin Deep. When the woman who shuffles and hobbles on broken, rotting, putrid bone is sexy. When to pee, meaning 15 minutes of 1 drop, 2 drop, burning agony, spells purity. When the skin of her legs, lips and chin must be plucked like the flesh of a dead fowl that's roasting, back arched through inches of forced constant tiptoe, body shaped by the wire in the clothes it's thrust into. Lead and mercury exchanged for parabens, for that same glow. In all honesty, perhaps the reality is it's time to revise our perception of beauty. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. That was wonderful, wonderful. Is Charlie here? I didn't think so. So, fresh from the final of Novel Slam, it's time for Phil, if that's all right. Are you ready to read something? Yeah? So, yeah, Phil was one of our finalists at Novel Slam last week. And I still think could have won, but it didn't go that way.
Yeah, I came here last week and got the bug. I'm just going to keep coming back to these things until Bev gets sick of me. Yeah, a bit of context for this. I was writing a novel and... Oh, is that a bit better? There we go. Thank you very much. All good? Okay. The novel that I was here with last week, I was working on for about a year and a half, and it was going really well. And then I had a baby, and that kind of put the kibosh on that for a while. And as my life kind of turned into a parade of nappy changes and late nights and kids' parties. I think most parents have had this thought process. I really hope they have. I found myself thinking about, different paths my life could have taken, about, the roads not traveled down, all that kind of thing. And so I wrote something about people who get the chance to take those opportunities. With a dash of science fiction. There's not much of it. It doesn't have a proper title. The working title I've come up with is The Grass is Always Greener in the Other Man's Dimension. I wasn't with my father the first time he died. I only got to see the body later on when the police needed someone to identify him. Some poor woman walking a Dashen found him early one Monday morning in June, slumped at the wheel of his car on an industrial estate at the dodgy end of Sheffield. My mother hadn't seen him since Friday night, but that wasn't unusual. He had a habit of disappearing on us, sometimes for days at a time when his work took him down some bizarre rabbit hole or another. The difference was that until now, he'd always come back. According to the officers I spoke to, the identification was a formality. They found his wallet in his jacket with all the cash and cards, including his driver's license, still inside. We'd have to wait for the autopsy to confirm it, but it didn't look like there were any signs of foul play. Most likely it was a heart attack. A shock, to be sure, but not out of the ordinary for a man in his mid-60s, especially one who mostly consisted on a diet of black coffee and ginger snaps. The only really strange thing was nestled in the boot of his car. Between the jumper cables and the giant bottle of water he kept in there for emergencies was a suitcase I didn't recognize, a stylish hold-all from an upmarket leather goods shop, packed full of clothes my father never would have worn in a million years. His style icon was Clark Kent, and his favorite color was beige. These outfits looked like they belonged to a man 30 years younger. In hindsight, it's strange to think how calm I felt that day. Maybe because everything felt so oddly familiar. The room where I was taken to see my dad was one I'd seen in any number of detective films and moody Scandinavian dramas, all clean, white and sterile, a body on a table covered by a white sheet under the harsh fluorescent lights. Or maybe I was just clinging to the hope that it wouldn't be him, that there'd been some terrible mix-up and I was about to see some other dead person that just happened to look exactly like him. When the somber woman in the dark suit eventually lifted the sheets, it took me a moment to register that the body on the table was in fact my father. It had his salt and pepper hair and the grey beard still holding on to a few strands of copper, but death had rendered the face uncanny. The proportions were all wrong, like this was a latex mask poorly stretched over another man's skull. The nose was too pointed, the forehead too broad, the hairline the wrong shape. But then I blinked and there was no mistaking it. I thought I'd react more dramatically, that I'd turn and run sobbing from the room or beat on his chest in the hope of somehow miraculously reviving him or some other well-worn cliche. Instead, I simply nodded and said, "Yep, that's him." Then I left. I don't want to give you the impression that I wasn't sad. My father had always been my favorite person, the one man in the world who understood me, even if I never came close to understanding him. He had always known what to say to pull me out of my funk, when I needed a hug and when I needed to be left alone. But on that day, standing in the car park, holding the box with Dad's belongings and dragging that strange leather suitcase behind me, all I felt was anger. I was pissed off that he hadn't taken better care of himself. I was angry that he'd chosen to bury himself in his work and completely shut the world out. I was furious at the suitcase and the implications of a secret life that it carried within it. But mostly I was just dreading the fact that I had to call Mum and tell her the bad news. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. We're going to have Kim, if that's all right.
I just put my name down on the off chance, so let me just find something real quick. Okay, this is called What If. What if all of it was supposed to happen exactly as it had done? What if I was never meant to accept that promotion? What if I was never meant to go through another very challenging time at work? What if I thought I had it all figured out and now it's actually pushed me to a whole other space of huge growth? What if the past 9 months were supposed to be my biggest growth yet? What if I had to go through this, all the very tough emotions, the anxiety-inducing work people, the second-guessing of myself, to know that this is so not meant for me? What if I needed to take this job to discover I could write pieces for other people to read, and not just for my journal? What if it all led to this moment right now, to realizing that the fulfilling life I want and crave is right here? What if applying for jobs in a space I know I'm confident but can still be a little challenged is exactly what I need to keep writing, to keep traveling, to keep figuring out who I am? What if I needed this to happen so I could choose to opt out? What if choosing to be in the relationship that I was in is not where I was supposed to be? What if focusing on solely being happy, fulfilled? And what if all of those things only contributed by 10% to the rest of it, and then it coming into my happy and full life? What if I had to go through all of it so that I could come to this place and ask, is this what I want, or do I just want to enjoy my life? What if I had taken that job and stayed in that relationship and stayed in that city? Would I still have been frustrated? Would I still have been trying to control? Would I still have been pushing for more? And I wouldn't have the chance to write this, like really write this. It was all meant to be, and it was all meant to be for my highest good and for my chance to reach my destined path. I was meant to write, and it was meant to be shared. I was meant to volunteer, and I was meant to realize that joy doesn't just come from work or a relationship. It comes from all the tiny things that happen in your day. It comes from waking up in the middle of a double bed, having the coffee you love, having a call with your mum, enjoying the sunshine or enjoying the rain, the text from your friend, the spontaneous lunch date with your other friends. It's in the fun of doing something exciting that you love and writing. It's in living and not just working your arse off or investing your time in a relationship that doesn't serve you. Thanks.
Thank you, Kim. It was nice to hear I wouldn't have been writing this, and here I am writing, and we're really happy to have you with us. I'm going to finish off quickly just to say Adam and I will be around for a few more minutes to sign any books. I'm selling mine dead cheap. If you want one, I've got loads. But also, David has made all the sound work, and he asked if he can read his little poem. So I'm going to let him finish off.
You haven't heard it yet. This is called, excuse me, I better get the mic right for me, haven't I? This is called The Wasp Won't Go. Dead wasp on window bottom. I didn't know what to do, so wrapped it up in tissue and threw it in the loo. Could have used the bin, but I was in a rush. Regretting it now, though, 'cause the wasp won't flush. Its tissue paper wrapping shut off around the bend, but the wasp is on the surface, won't meet its watery end. I cover it with toilet paper, flush it once again, but after swirling turbulence, the wasp carcass remains. I wait for my next visit, then shoot at it with wee. A bit more toilet paper, but its exit's not to be. Another wait, it's time to poo. I bare my bum to stinger, drop a few depth charges flush, but no, the wasp still lingers. It spent a good few hours floating in my little pond, but my final movement of the night sent it to the great beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for raising the tone of the evening. And thank you, everybody, for coming. It's nice to see you. Keep in touch with the Writers' Workshop and hang out with each other for the next 5 or 10 minutes while we pack away. Thank you.